Hello and welcome back to the Perception Podcast where we just see things a little bit differently. I'm Dan, your host, and I'm only realising now as I'm saying this how much better my little brother is at doing the intro. As you might be able to tell, I'm on my own again today, so this episode is going to be a little bit shorter than last week's, but today I thought we'd talk a little bit about school and some of the challenges that going back can cause to people's mental health. Now this is anything but a normal going back to school situation. With the pandemic, we've been off for so long, and at least I know I've got quite used to rolling out of bed, opening Teams on my laptop, in my pyjamas, and sort of listening to the lesson for the next hour, trying not to fall asleep. So all of a sudden, going back to school and getting straight back into things can definitely cause a lot of hassle. So I just thought we'd get straight into that today, try to address some of the effects that going back to school, or I guess we could even extend that to like work, can have on your mental health. So I started recording that kind of intro bit a couple of days ago. Since then, school's kind of got on top of me a little bit, which is quite fitting for this episode really, and my body has decided to get really ill for some reason, so I'm having a go at this again. I honestly don't know whether this is going to come out on like the scheduled time that it normally does. I hope that it does, but let's get straight into the discussion part of this episode, because even though I'm not feeling 100%, I still want to give this episode a go and try and help some people out that are possibly going back to school at the minute. So how do I feel about going back to school in general? Well, I'm kind of glad that we actually get to see each other for once. Like, you see all the people on computer screens all the time. It's actually quite nice. Even if you're not necessarily close with everybody, it's quite nice just to have a chat with them, catch up a little bit, have a chat about the football and stuff like that. And also, it's quite nice to have face-to-face lessons. So if you don't understand anything, you can ask the teacher and stuff like that. And it's just basically so much better to have that human interaction. But do I think it's absolutely necessary for everyone to go back to school immediately? Maybe not have the like kind of rotation thing where certain years go in and certain years like stay off for a bit and stuff like that. I think that might be a bit more helpful, because with all the testing that we're having to do, there's so much risk for like cross-contamination. I know at least at my school where they're literally lining up outside the school, like right next to each other, and some of them test positive and they've literally been standing next to each other for like sometimes hours waiting to get the test. So I think that's a bit like a bit mishandled from the school, maybe the government a little bit there. And I don't think it's necessary all to just always go, right, we're doing something, get everybody back in school immediately as fast as possible, March the 8th, right back into it, test exams, everything, let's get going again. I think it's a bit naive just to think that everybody can just get right back into the swing of things without this extra like added pressure and like what the hell's going on, without like sufficient communication. It's also been quite weird, obviously, having to get tested every couple of days. Like, now I'm a person that hadn't been tested previously at all. I didn't know what it was like. So then having to come in for certain days to get like not a needle, but pretty much a big cotton bud stuck on my nose and stuck on my mouth so far up all the time. It's quite daunting a little bit, but it's quite weird just your everyday school life. You just suddenly have to go down to the hall and get tested every so often. It's kind of weird, and it kind of creates a sense that we're here out of kind of keeping up appearances. Do you know what I mean? It's not an actual school environment at the minute. It's kind of like, right, we're in class, everybody put their mask on. It's kind of like a bit like a hospital. It's kind of like a place of business at the minute. It's not like a proper school. It doesn't feel like really nurturing at the minute, and that can cause a little bit of anxiety, because you normally feel at home at the school, I think, and a bit relaxed with your teachers and your friends. But I think with all the protocols that we're obviously having to follow at the minute because of COVID and the masks and the testing and stuff like that, it can just seem really, I can't find a better word, but just daunting. You're just standing there, and it's kind of like a machine of people just getting tested and going, and like having to wear their mask constantly. It's like, it doesn't seem like the natural environment that you need to learn, and especially like, I know I'm doing sixth form A-level. I just think it's going a bit too quickly at the moment. I think we don't have enough time to really sit back and like kind of, I always say detox, but like kind of just think about what we've learned, go over it a bit more and make sure that we fully understand it. I think there's too much emphasis nowadays on just making sure that everybody knows as much as possible, and not making sure that like the quality of what we know is better than the quantity, if you know what I mean. I think that's a big problem with testing at the minute as well, because especially kids with additional needs like autism or anxiety, especially in assessments, all the information that you know that you've been taught can suddenly come flooding back into your memory all at once, and it gets a bit confusing. Whereas I think if they spent more time actually going, right, these are the main points that you need to know. Obviously it's when you've covered that, you can obviously go into the additional points and go further and further. But these are the main points that you need to remember for this topic or whatever. And I just think that'd be a lot clearer and a lot more helpful to go into assessments and stuff without that extra anxiety. So I just think at the minute, my main point here really is I just think the machine of it, the kind of the quickness that they're trying to do everything and just get people to appease the population, basically, just get people right back into schools and get right back going, basically, as this kind of machine, as I keep saying. I just think it's way too quick, and it doesn't take into consideration enough, like, the effect that it can not only have on kids with, like, extra difficulties necessarily, it's just an effect on everybody. It's just really draining, and you don't really get a chance to kind of go, like, do you know what I mean? You don't get a chance to go, how am I feeling? How am I coping with stuff like that? Like, I even know this week, as I said earlier, that I've kind of, like, not felt very well this week. I know that it's Friday as I'm recording this, and I actually, like, had a funny turn. Like, I didn't feel very well, and I nearly had to come home from school because I'm just so drained. I was actually dehydrated, and I didn't even notice, but I'm just so drained by the amount of work that we're doing, and we don't even notice it because it's just becoming like the new normal. And I think that's really damaging to your kind of state of mind and your well-being in general. Now, I'm well aware after listening to that little bit back that I said like about 1,000 times, and it came a little bit across as a jumbled mess, really. But hopefully I got the point off as well there a little bit. But I also wanted to talk about how I felt after school and also in the mornings. Have I been motivated to actually get into school? And I think that's a really good question, actually, because at the moment I'm finding it very difficult in the mornings at that 7 a.m. when you're not really used to it, where you kind of have the freedom, just as I say, to roll out of bed and go straight onto online learning. Having to get up at 7, make sure you look presentable, make sure you've got your books and your textbooks and stuff like that. I think there can be a real lack of motivation there for a lot of kids, especially if they haven't got the driving force of, oh, I'm going to school for this reason. If it just feels like this kind of machine, as I'm saying, I know I keep harkening back to that, but I think when it becomes more of like I said like again, I really need to stop doing that, but when it becomes more of necessity rather than, oh, I actually want to do this, I actually want to learn, I actually want to bet myself, which is what school is supposed to be about in the kind of breaking down of things, in the real basics. It's supposed to be for that. When it becomes this kind of public appeasement, you can really lack that self-motivation to go, oh, I really want to get up in the mornings, or I really want to go to sleep early at night so I feel rested by the morning. Do you know what I mean? You want to stay up, you want to relax, you want to be able to go on YouTube, you want to play your Xbox, you want to have time with your family, you want to watch TV, and homework as well can be such an extra added weight that you think, oh, if I don't do that, I'm going to get told off as well. But that's 2 hours long, and I haven't had a real chance to have a break. And I think having a break can be so helpful while you're at school, just to kind of have that kind of relaxing period where you think, yes, I've been at school, yes, I've done a good day's work, yes, I've worked hard today, so I also deserve that kind of time to myself where I can kind of not push back, but get through that anxiety, get through that anger that's built up during the day, and just kind of reflect on what you've done that day, and just feel proud that you've been able to go to school, that you've achieved this and stuff like that. I just think that's really important, because otherwise you wake up in the morning, you think, oh, it's another day of school, it's just going to be the same old boring thing. If you actually go into it thinking, what have I learnt today? Do you know what I mean? And today I learnt that this thing about the government, like I'm doing government politics that I didn't know before, and this thing about philosophy that's really interesting. And if you take that if you're just laying in bed and you just think about what you found interesting about the day, then I think that can often relate into a motivated school mind rather than just, oh, do you know what I mean? Because I've definitely been there with school. It can definitely be frustrating. Even though I'm in sixth form now, and even though I get to do the work that I want to, philosophy, government politics, English and history, which are all very interesting subjects to me, it can become a bit of a chore. So I think having your own space, giving yourself time to relax, even if teachers or even your parents are moaning at you, like, you need to do this homework. I think while that is obviously still so important, and setting yourself timelines, and even if you're the biggest of procrastinators like me, telling yourself, I'm gonna set this goal, I'm gonna stick by it. Also give yourself time to go, time to relax and just time to not be doing anything really, not be doing anything productive, maybe just having time to yourself and just doing nothing so that your brain can just relax and reload for the next day and take on all the important information that you have to learn daily in order for tests. And in case we go into yet another lockdown and you have to be on your own, and just really value the time that you've got with your teacher at the moment, because I think it can be so helpful going forward in schools and not having that anxiety around tests, thinking, yes, we've had these years, months of learning, but I've actually done most of it on my own and I actually don't know very much because I've had to teach myself. So I think while we're in school, now's the best time, even though you might feel anxious about talking to the teacher, might feel embarrassed, even if it's one-to-one, even if you shoot them an email, I think going and talking to the teacher and asking them the questions where necessary and telling them even that they're doing a good job, even that little bit of motivation for them could really help them out. They could also feel bummed out to themselves. We're all human at the end of the day. I think we need to remember that. Like, teachers might appear like they stay at school 24/7, like the old stereotype when you're younger, oh, the teacher doesn't go out of school, but they do, and that they have their own lives. And I think just that little bit of motivation, just that bit of interesting talk that's not necessarily inside the lesson, but something you've gone and researched afterwards in your own time that you found interesting and that you've actually thought about in your own space, I think can really keep that motivation going and think, oh yeah, I want to go back tomorrow and I want to learn about this, rather than it being that kind of mental chore that you're having to get through every day. It becomes less of a challenge and more of a opportunity. Although I do think it'd be kind of dishonest for me not to mention the communication from the government and from, obviously I only have the experience in my school, but I've heard of others, and I'm sure some of you will have experience of the same sort of thing. I think the communication at such a puzzling and bewildering time has been so lacking in all departments. What the schedule is going to be like, how much work we're going to be doing, when our tests are going to be, and just stuff that can really, I know myself, just set your mind off and set your brain into overdrive, thinking what's going to happen, I don't know what's going on. And routine can be such an important factor for me. Daily knowing, right, if I do this, this will happen and I'll be okay. If that suddenly goes, I do this, but this other thing's happened, then that just kind of throws my brain into absolute chaos. So I think the communication, especially with SEND kids, can be so much better, even if it's just a personal email. And I'm aware that teachers have their own social lives, and I'm aware that adults in general have their own social lives, but it only takes a couple of seconds just to check in with kids, even if you're parents, you know what I mean? Just how you find in school, not necessarily badgering the kids, because I know that sounds pretty harsh, but I find if I come home and then my mum's just tell me everything about your day, I'm kind of go, oh, I don't really want to think about that. But if say I found politics enjoyable that day or interesting, and then she asked me a question about that, I feel like we could have a conversation for an hour then, do you know what I mean? And I just feel like communication, as I'm sure I've said on previous episode, I'm not quite sure, but communication can be such an important factor in all facets of life. I think communication with your teachers, communication with your parents, and just communication at a time like this is so necessary for us all to keep sane, do you know what I mean? Know what's going on and not trying to bluff each other constantly and I think this is right, but I'm not necessarily sure. I think just asking questions and just making sure that everybody's on the same page is so crucial and so important at this sort of time, because people don't realise that the fear of the unknown and not knowing what's going on can lead to so many other things. I learned about it in philosophy quite a lot, how humanity as a whole is just so much more accustomed to what they accept. And any time something just throws them off course, or something extraordinary that they weren't expecting, they're always likely to disagree or try to eliminate it, because it's so much easier just to stay in the safety bubble that you've created. But I think at a time like this, communication can just be so helpful. I definitely think schools and the government can be so much more upfront than they're being. Obviously, they can't tell us everything, and that's a given. But it's just so much behind the scenes that we don't get to hear about, and we're kind of left in the dark a little bit, that make us anxious, that make us angry, that make us, I don't know, all these sorts of different feelings that you get can be so easily avoided with just a little bit of leeway from both sides, really, I think. And with the pressure that anxiety can cause, I also want to segue into a segment about the pressure to be perfect in a school setting when you're just not, when we're all human and we all have imperfections. And I think especially as a teenager, and although this podcast is obviously aimed at anybody, I'm a teenager myself. I've been a teenager now for like 4 or 5 years, and obviously that's where my expertise comes from. And I think the pressure to be not perfect, but just fit the stereotypes in a school setting, even though people aren't necessarily pressuring you, in my experience, like it doesn't have to be like verbal pressure to be, oh, you need to look this way. It's just seeing others and seeing how maybe you might not fit the norm can often press you into this perfect idyllic image that in your brain just causes so much extra unnecessary self-hatred. And I think in a school setting it just breeds more and more of this, because we're constantly, I think especially in sixth form, in our own clothes. And just saying that, I don't think that necessarily sixth form should have a uniform or anything like that, but I think that being in our own clothes and having our own personalities, it's so much clearer to see like where you don't necessarily align with the popular kids or align with the social norms, and it can create a certain disparity, and can definitely create a divide within the class of definitely like the cool kids in like quotation marks and stuff like that. So I think the pressure to be perfect in school setting and like self-image can be so damaging to young kids, because it's just like if they don't have the newest clothes or the newest shoes or anything like that, or even like they have not learnt this like new word, new colloquialism or something like that, the pressure and the jokes that can come with that, even if it's your friends and they have the best intentions, the way that you interpret that and the way your perception can kind of mangle that into this inner anxiety, this inner self-hatred, like, oh my God, that was so stupid of me. And like that kind of embarrassing moment that you remember for God knows how long. I just think the school setting, with all its expectations and the hierarchy of popularity, as I like to say, can just exacerbate this so much. And it's just so unnecessary. I think if kids especially just learn, like I've heard from other people, when you get older, you tend to give less of a shit. I think that if kids had that kind of self-confidence as teenagers, where they could literally just be upfront with each other and just say to each other, like, I'm feeling crap today or something like that, I think it creates such more of a healthy environment for everybody, where they weren't constantly judging each other, like, what's that guy thinking of me? What's this person thinking of me? How am I being perceived in this situation and stuff like that? I think it just adds another factor to an already like incredibly challenging atmosphere, where you're fighting for your grades that are going to determine your rest of your life, whilst dealing with this constant anxiety and anger and processing what's going on and making sure your perception's right and stuff like that. I just think if we as a society could in some way work to kind of diminish this even a little bit, it would just help so much with our frame of mind and our outlooks towards the world. If everybody was just a bit, not even more positive, because I know sometimes when everybody's a bit positive, that can also be a bit draining. Like, how are you so positive when the world's so rubbish at the moment? Stuff like that. But just a bit more just upfront with people, like, you're wearing a nice shirt today, even something like that, like, I like your style or something like that, can be such a boost to somebody's personal confidence. And maybe say it to somebody that you would never talk to. Do you know what I mean? Even if you're one of the geekier kids, which is perfectly fine. You went up to one of the more popular kids and went like, I really like your shirt or something today. I know that's a stupid example, but that's just obviously what's in my head at the moment. But just get out there a bit more and just be a bit more open, and don't necessarily have a full conversation if you find that a bit embarrassing, but just little comments like that maybe open you to more social interaction a bit more, and kind of eliminate that barrier that you create in your own mind and kind of wall that you create for yourself. In school, I find specifically that just, oh, I can't possibly talk to this person because then this would happen, and you kind of second guess yourself before even experimenting. And I think, especially at this age is just completely for experimenting with yourself and how you can be perceived to the world. And I just think it's so important to just kind of put yourself out there, because at the end of the day, if they don't respond to it well, you might never see them again. Do you know what I mean? It's just the perfect place to just be yourself. I find, especially in sixth form, you can see everybody's personalities, obviously. If there wasn't so much of a clique culture and there wasn't so much judgment, I think not, as I say, not even necessarily like this idyllic utopian atmosphere I'm looking to create. It's more just like a free space where the cool kids could talk to the smarter kids, and there wasn't so much of a divide. Do you know what I mean? You have to look this way or you have to be this way to get in with this group. I think it would just be a lot helpful to people's mental health in general, I think. And finally, in the little discussion bit, I also wanted to talk about my sleep schedule, because even though, obviously, as I've discussed previously on these episodes, that I deal with a lot of things like daily in my everyday life, with anxiety and with anger and stuff like that, I also suffer a lot with my sleep and kind of giving myself the rest that I need to like tackle the next day and stuff like that. And I feel like, just as I've mentioned earlier, just throwing yourself back into such a stressful, if I can get my words out, situation can be so harmful to like your sleep schedule and stuff like that. And I think, even though there's obviously been tests and it's obviously clear that sleep can help you, I think it's not stressed enough to young people. Obviously they spend like all night on games and stuff like that. How much sleep can help even with your mood. Do you know what I mean? I get up in the mornings most of the time and I'm just like the angriest person because I've got nowhere near enough sleep. I've stayed up till 3 a.m. doing homework because I haven't set myself like a proper schedule and completely forgot and had to do it completely last minute. So I've got about like maybe most nights just a couple of hours sleep, and I just realised that for the work that I'm doing, for the level that I'm doing, it's just way too grueling of a task to go through every day. 7 hours of A-level learning, which is full on. If you haven't been through it, I'm sure a lot of you know. Just having a couple of hours sleep. That's why I think today, Friday, I actually got dehydrated and I actually got a bit anxious, and I had that kind of funny turn where I had a bit of a migraine because I just think I'm overworking myself. And you hear about people at work in the real world, as people say, getting drained and getting overrun and overworked and burnt out, as all the YouTubers like to say. But I think that can also be in school as well, and I don't think we get enough time. Obviously, we have that home time where we're supposed to relax and stuff, and obviously school holidays, but often, especially as you get higher up the school, that's often filled with more work. Do you know what I mean? I don't think we get enough time to go, alright, here's the work, you've done that, well done for doing that, and now let's actually just talk. Even if it's still educational, if it's just that little bit more relaxing and interesting, I think, and even getting more of the work done in lessons. I don't think homework should necessarily be such a big factor, especially as you get late down the school, because oftentimes it can often be like an essay to hand in the next day, and that is just way too much work. If you want to have a little bit of time on YouTube, if you want to go on Netflix for a couple of hours, watch that new movie that's just come out, do you know what I mean? And then you're supposed to go to sleep also for 10 hours. I think that's just such an unrealistic expectation. And kids especially at our age now, just seem to be the busiest people in the world. Do you know what I mean? There's some people, I know some people that go to work only for a couple of hours, and they do their work, they do it to a great standard, but they get paid for that, and they get a couple of hours, and then they go to sleep, and then they can do whatever they want. It just feels like at high school, at sixth form, the teachers just give them more and more work, and because they obviously are only focused on their lesson, they don't look at the wider picture, like you're going to get that for every one of your subjects. They don't actually realise how much they're working you and how much this can like burn you out mentally, and how this can lead to like not handing in homework and not doing the best in tests. Because I always find it so weird when they've given us so much work and not necessarily talk to us one-on-one, and then say like, what went on here? You didn't get this question right, or you didn't get the marks that I expected. I always feel like I don't necessarily tell them because I'm really shy in school and I don't have that self-confidence as I was talking about earlier, but I feel like saying to them, well, it's because we're all completely overrun. Do you know what I mean? You're giving us tests left, right and centre to check like statistically that we're where we need to be, but you're not having the conversations with us as people, because I'm nearing being an adult now. I feel like I should be treated with respect, where they should just come to me as another human and go like, how are you finding the course? Are you finding okay, like what you're struggling with, and not just, are you meeting my criteria for being a teacher? Do you know what I mean? Because I think that can be so detrimental to an academic career. But yeah, I think that kind of does it for the discussion part of this episode. Again, I just want to apologise because I'm aware I'm kind of just muddling through this a little bit. As I've said, I'm definitely not 100%, but I still wanted to get this episode out. I still wanted to give you you guys a bit of just my experiences going through school at the minute. But yeah, as I say, this is definitely not the top tier work that I've ever done. But hopefully, as I say, it just helps a couple of you out there. But if we move on to like the question of today's episode, I thought it'd be great to talk about like the impact, how much of an impact not taking GCSEs might have on people's A-level results, or even not taking AS levels can have on people's A-level results, or not having the mocks and stuff like that. You know, you can interpret it in all different ways, but I feel like, not obviously with the government cancelling them last year and stuff like that, it can have a much bigger knock-on effect than people would necessarily expect. I definitely know that personally, the last proper set of exams that I must have taken were my actual SATs in year 6, that were obviously a lot more relaxed and a lot more of a, as I say, yeah, like relaxed setting than A-levels, which are obviously much more strict and making sure you're not cheating and stuff like that. And like SATs aren't exactly life-defining, you know what I mean? A-levels can often set out your not necessarily your life, but definitely your future aspirations, like whether you're going to go to uni or what necessarily you're going to study, and you might want to change that later in your life. But for right now, they can often be like the centre of your universe. Do you know what I mean? They can be the main thing you're depending on. And I feel like not having that kind of exam, not necessarily like scaring us into like knowing what an exam like, but just giving us the kind of experience of what a test in them sort of conditions can be like. Obviously, I don't know what the A levels are going to be. I don't know what the situation's gonna be, but I feel like not having that prior experience could prove to be a massive factor that I just think not enough people are anticipating at the minute. And for somebody that always worries with exams anyway, always gets that massive butterflies in my stomach when it comes to exam time, even if I'm well prepared, I've never gone into exam without feeling that like overcoming dread. Do you know what I mean? I think it's a huge problem. Like my school didn't decide to take AS levels, and I think that's such a mistake, because even though they're not the most important tests in the world, they're often a building block. Do you know what I mean? To test where you're at, how you're finding the subject. If even you might want to drop the subject if that test clearly shows that it's not the subject for you, maybe you could spend more time and effort on other ones. Do you know what I mean? It can often be that kind of examination. I know it's an exam in itself, but it can actually be an examination into how you're doing as a student and like to where you're at. I genuinely think that the government hasn't taken enough time thinking about like the effects that they can have on the students. They've obviously spent a lot of time thinking, right, let's get them back in school. That's the main priority. But they haven't thought about the potential effect they can have on us, I don't think, and our futures. And I think, although definitely the government cannot think about every single individual student, they definitely should have considered our futures a bit more. Do you know what I mean? Rather than just, let's just get them back in school. It doesn't really matter. As long as they do the really important tests, then let's just feed them to the lions at the end of the day. It doesn't really matter to us, and that's kind of the impression that I'm getting from this government at the minute. Even though they've done some good work with the pandemic and stuff like that, and they've definitely done some good work. There's no doubt about that. I feel a bit like kind of discarded. It's like the discarded class of 2022. I think we'd be when we leave school now. I feel a bit discarded, and that like our grades and our futures don't really matter to the government, which might well be true. But being in the position myself, I don't think that's a very good perspective to have on your future. Do you know what I mean? Your future aspirations might be dented because somebody decided that it's not all that important, when to you, obviously, it's what you're going to do in life. It's where you're going to take your life, and it's a huge deciding factor. How well you do in A-levels and stuff like that. And I just think not enough attention is being paid to that at the minute. Even though we have regular assessments in class, they're in class, do you know what I mean? They're not very well regulated, and it just seems a bit unfair, especially not just with our year necessarily, with the year 13 that's in there at the minute, with the year that should have just done their GCSEs. I feel like it's just kind of leaving us to our own devices when we haven't even necessarily figured out the world yet. Do you know what I mean? How are we supposed to decide what to focus on and where to set our minds to if the government that should be helping us as teenagers, should be helping us finding out our next steps, are just going, well, you know, we tried, we failed, just leave them. Do you know what I mean? It kind of feels like that. And I definitely don't think that's the right attitude to take. But then again, that's just my perspective. That's what this whole podcast is supposed to be about. And I would love to hear you guys, the listeners' opinion on it as well. Because obviously, I'm in the situation as well myself. And it can often be very like, as I said before, that kind of tunnel vision. And I can only see my own perspective. So it'd be really interesting to hear some people that are maybe in a lower part of school, their thoughts on it, or maybe even people that have finished school, and maybe even our parents, what their thoughts are on going back to school and the testing side of things, because obviously they can have such a big impact. And I just think either way, whether you think they should go further into testing and even do even more, or pull back a bit like maybe I think, or do it in a different way, go a different direction with it, I'd just love to hear your guys' thoughts on it, because yeah, I just think it's such an interesting topic, and I definitely think that it's one that's not been paid enough attention to, whatever way you roll the dice on it, really. And with that, though, I think we're nearing the end of this episode. I hope that anyone going back to school, or even work really, at the minute, found this even a little bit helpful, because this can be stressful enough at the best of times, you know. It's just been thrown out of the water with the whole pandemic thing. Nobody could have seen this coming. And yeah, I just hope I can at least reach a couple of years. Even if this all sounded like a bit of a muddle, maybe just a couple of minutes of this made a bit of sense. And yeah, maybe you could share your thoughts, or maybe it will help you going back to school, or maybe give you the motivation to go, right, let's just find that little one thing that's just that little bit interesting that will want to make me go the next day, or maybe might help me decide what I want to do in the future. What I might want to study at GCSE, A-level, whatever. Do you know what I mean? That's my main aim with this. And even, as I say, even if it's just one person, I really hope that I can reach that person and help them, really, because I always found that, yes, on the media and stuff like that, there is a lot of help out there nowadays, but not necessarily male, and not necessarily a teenager actually at this time going through it themselves. I feel like not only I, but maybe some of the guests that I have on in future, and like my class as a whole, like our perception as a whole, not just focusing solely on me and just like how the whole year is feeling, really. I feel that can provide such a fresh new, as I say, just perspective on the situation, and just kind of give a whole new outlook that hasn't really been considered, or like, I don't even know, like, talks about at the minute. I just think it's really interesting, and it's yet to be uncovered, really. Obviously, with this episode, it was just me today, but don't worry, I'm planning on getting some more guests on in the near future. Definitely have their kind of expert analysis on things. I'm kind of embarrassed at the minute to like kind of reach out to the people I know, like, personally. I don't know whether they want to do this, whether it would fit their kind of, I don't want to say brand, but you know what I mean. But I'm a little bit embarrassed to do that, but I'm going to have to pluck up the courage a little bit, definitely, to get some new opinions on it here, and definitely some more in detailed analysis they can definitely give, where they actually are professionals in that field, and can definitely give a whole bucket load of information. Can I get my words out, please, to you guys at home, and can definitely help you out way more than me. I think that would be so good to have in the future. And I would also like to say another huge thank you for the support that I've received recently, because after only doing 2 proper episodes, I'm so excited and so genuinely chuffed that this podcast has been able to hit over 100 downloads in just 2 episodes, and which might not sound like that big of a deal, but it's definitely an encouraging sign for me. And even if it sounds small to some people, and even if they think, oh, that's not that much, it really does mean the world to me, and I really do appreciate it. As I say, I normally am a very negative person, and yeah, it's just the support has been absolutely blowing me away. I thought I might just trial this for the intro, or maybe just 1 episode. Maybe my mum would listen to it and think, oh yeah, that's quite good, and then I'd never do it again, or do it in 2 months. But yeah, this is definitely turning into something that I'm really excited with, definitely. But all I have left to say really is, if you are listening just to the audio, please remember to share and download. And if you are listening on YouTube, watching that little squirrely eye thing, if you could like, comment and subscribe, would mean the world to me, would really appreciate it, and obviously would just boost things a little bit and get the word out there a bit more. I genuinely do not know what I'll be covering next week, which isn't great planning on my part, but I might add a bit of spontaneity, might spice things up a little bit. But I've said on my notes here, as I'm sure a lot of you will know, it's a lot harder to find like extra playing time whilst going to sixth form and just getting into the swing of things again. Really, just finding that new balance and new routine. Like as I said earlier, I find so important. But anyway, I hope you still enjoyed this episode, and you'll hopefully hear from me very, very soon. Bye.